Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Crime and Entertainment. I got a very special guest for you today. I actually met him a couple of weeks ago when I was up in California for the Francis podcast. He was actually up there to do Soft White Underbelly, which I think is coming out very shortly. Please welcome to the show, Jeff Crow. He runs the Mob True Crime channel. Jeff, how you doing, my friend?
I am awesome. Great to see you again, my friend. And yeah, we had quite the time. We'll have to do a show strictly on LA and other things like that one of these times.
Yeah, it was cool. You actually took me to see Bugsy's old spot that he was assassinated in his home. We hit the Whiskey a Go Go up, which is world famous. A lot of famous bands played there, a lot of famous artists, and even got a chance to go into the Viper Room.
Yeah.
Didn't get a ton of time in there. They were closing down, which kind of shocked me. I guess that's the thing up there. They're closing stuff down at like 12 o'clock now in LA.
Well, we got lucky that it was even open at all because if you go online, it says it was due to be shut down before because it's supposed to be redeveloped and torn down and condos or whatever put up. So I didn't
Really?
actually think it was even going to be open, and voila, we walked right by the sign.
Yeah, yeah, we were just walking because you was like, "I think it's somewhere right around where we're at," and then I'm like, "Damn, it's popped up right there on our right," and
You know,
the
we're
lady
like,
was like,
you're like, is the Viper Room around here? And it's somewhere. And then we walk like 10 feet and look up. Oh, yeah.
"Yeah," they let us in, said they were about to do last call, but I just wanted to go in just to see the inside of it. So much history there, with Mickey Cohen and obviously Johnny Depp, and then I think even after Depp owned it, Molly Bloom ran car games out of there with like Ben Affleck, Toby Maguire, a lot of those guys. So which you kind of see part of in that movie Molly's Game. Um, so just a lot of good history in there. But I wanted to give a little bit about your story, man, because I mean, you had told me a little bit of it as we were down there, and obviously, like I said, look for it on Soft White Underbelly. But old Hollywood puts a different flair on things, so we figured we'd have you on and kind of get a little idea of who Jeff Crow is and what he's about. And like any first time guest, we kind of like to start from the beginning. Where did it all start? Where'd you grow up? Family life, that sort of thing.
Well, in the beginning, to start this off like it's the book of Genesis or something from the Bible, right? God created the sun. So I am from Central California. I'm from Fresno, which is smack dab in the middle of the state. And the neighborhood that I grew up in was called Parkside. It was named after Roding Park, which was uh, at one time, it's where the zoo there is and other some other attractions. It used to be, kind of a nice area by the time I'm, of age and all that stuff. And it was already a mob ran area, and some of the Mexican organized crime guys were operating out of there and things like that. My family life, I had a mom and a dad in my house. However, my mom was highly religious and involved with religious to the nth degree. And my dad was kind of a pot grower. They were 60s hippies together, a little bit California hippies, so to speak. But my mom had went into religion when I was younger, and so that's all that I remember from her. And then my dad ultimately went legit and became a construction subcontractor. But the neighborhood itself, as far as the mob was concerned, Fresno is an open city, always had been. And because of its location, it was the spot where a lot of the Southern California and Northern California Cosa Nostra guys would meet up to do exchanges with their drug stuff and other things. And it was also because it was open, there was out of state guys, and it was a Genovese stronghold. In fact, Luciano himself sent some of his guys out here. The Sika brothers, they operated under Willie Moretti, which was the New Jersey faction
Right.
of the Genovese. Well, then Luciano family, of course, later renamed Genovese when he took it over. Frank Sinatra had a club down the street from where I grew up, literally 1 mile right at the freeway. And there was also a lot of older motels around there where there was prostitution activity, which is where one of the rackets the mob had. And of course, they had the drug rackets because wherever you have prostitution, you're going to have ladies using H typically, but other stuff too. And then as far as the Mexican organized crime stuff, my area was the southernmost part of where Norteños, the northern Mexicans, as we call them out here, the Nuestra Familia operated. The local county clique, if you will, they were called the F-14, and they had different barrios. Parkside PSF, Parkside Fresno, was one of their barrios. And so when I was younger, they worked with the Italians. The Italians started to fade out when I was a kid. The mob was getting wrecked out here in the early 80s. The FBI did an effective job versus the mob in LA and other parts of California, sort of a precursor to what would happen in New York later.
Right.
And they worked with the Mexican guys. The Mexican guys were, came from the prison system. So they weren't the kind of guys that were scared to go to prison. And so that was the environment in the 80s. And then also we had Asian gangs. We had Southeast Asians. We had Laotians, Vietnamese, etc. Basically refugees from the Vietnam War who settled here. And so those guys were definitely no joke either. And then we had Woods and ABs, Aryan Brotherhood. Woods are every white male criminal, mob included. If you go in the system and you're not a S offender or whatever, you're automatically basically a Wood. They're going to classify you, as I found out when I
Right.
started getting arrested. So we had a lot of different types of, OC and all that. And then, of course, we can't forget there was a lot of honest people that lived there too. Not everybody's a criminal. A lot of people were, you had a lot of hardworking families that lived there too.
Right. So, like, what was your first, like, I guess, dab into the criminal lifestyle? I mean, was it drugs, or what was kind of your introduction into that?
All right. So initially, you know, I I was not one of these people who grew up idolizing the mob in my area and all that. In fact, I thought of most criminals as scumbags, and that they were the reason why we had such a messed up area with shootings and all the other stuff.
So,
So
real quick before we elaborate on that, you just said something that I wanted to key in on real quick. You said idolizing mob guys. So, like, who was like one of the more prominent mob figures in your area coming up at that time, or were you talking about more or less guys that had just portrayed on TV from New York and Chicago?
Joe Sika would be a prominent name. Joe Sika was a big time heroin trafficker from
Okay.
the East Coast. He had a group of him and his brothers, Alfred. There was a few others. They set up shop. He had my region, but they also had Burbank down in Southern California and
Right.
other areas, and they were very prominent. And so Joe Sika would be probably the biggest name. I want to say he passed away when I was 7 or 8 years old. So he's one of those guys you see on the news
Right.
and all that. He didn't really get hemmed up too badly considering what he was involved with. He did also set up what you could call now the modern day drug trafficking routes out of Mexico. A lot of times when mobsters were deported by the Kennedy administration, some would go to Cuba and set up shop, as we all know, but others set up shop um, prior to Kennedy. When they were getting kicked out by Eisenhower, they would go to Cuba. It changed with Castro and all that stuff, but they would also set up shop in Tijuana. And so the Sika brothers and basically set up a direct pipeline of drugs coming from Mexico straight to my city. And they also had a pipeline straight to LA. If you know the geography of California and the way our freeways are, there's only so many routes out of the Los Angeles basin up to Northern California. And
Right.
the two biggest ones pass through my county. And that made it where my county had a lot of clout in that world. And we had corrupt police chiefs that were more than willing to work with the mob. They
Yeah.
were all literally friends. They would never bust them. They would tip the FBI, or excuse me, tip them off as to FBI, Federal Bureau of Narcotics investigations, that kind of stuff. So they thrived here.
Okay. All right. So now, yeah, back to the original question, kind of like, how did you? I was just curious of who was kind of like prominent in that area, because you never hear a ton about guys from Chicago. It's always New York, Philadelphia, New Jersey, Chicago. So I wanted to elaborate on that just a little bit. So, yeah, again, how did you kind of get involved in this lifestyle?
So Again, when I didn't, I'm not one of these people that looked up to them or even wanted to be anything like that. However, around the age of 16 or so, I found out that somebody in our church was doing negative stuff, we'll just say, to some of the girls. He ultimately was prosecuted and sent to state prison in California. And believe me, he didn't have a good time when he was in there.
I can imagine.
And but when I
As
he
he
made
shouldn't
an
have.
attempt, he made an attempt towards my sister, and she told me. And as a 16-year-old, you don't have a lot of power, especially when you've been raised in an environment where you're to look up to them. So the first crimes I committed were vandalism and theft, and it was against church leaders. It was my way of getting back at them, and that's what sort of broke the moral back, if you will, of and broke my morality towards that stuff. Once
Right.
you do that to them, then you can, it's not that difficult. So I got into thefts from stores, thefts from businesses. I also got into GTAs. That was big in my region. Fresno is always has always been number one or two on the national car theft list. We always fought it out with Newark, New Jersey for the number one spot every year on the
Yeah.
FBI's. We would literally look at our local newspaper to see if we beat Newark that year or if they beat us. That's how bad it was in my part of Cali. And so stealing their cars. And then ultimately, with that, I figured out that a lot of the Mexican kids were stealing cars, and I had a connection. One of my white friends from elementary school, his dad was involved with the ABs, we'll just say, and they operated on that prostitution strip as well. Because a lot of times when guys would parole, they would immediately start selling stuff, and they had the ABs are known for chop shop kind of stuff. They're the
Right.
big on. Same thing with Mexican, Mexican mafia, the ENF. They're big with cutting up cars too. So I figured out that I could let the Mexican homeboys steal the cars. They would joyride them around, and they would abandon them. And I'd wait a few days, and if the cops hadn't towed them away, I'm like, the cops don't know that's sitting here, and I would just drive it about one half of a mile and sell it for about 100 to 200 bucks a car. And so I had crime partners at the time that I sort of had a blended crew of guys, and the I never got into like home burglaries and stuff like that because I always felt like that was the kind of violation you don't do. Plus, I always thought about it: if a dude broke into my house, I would
Yeah.
have, I ain't trying to get clipped for a new TV or a VCR back then, right?
Right.
So that's how that got started. And then I also got involved with selling marijuana at the low level. And ultimately, I came into contact with a local cartel guy tied to the Tijuana guys who was able to hook me and my bros up with really good prices on Mexican brick bud. And it went from there.
So at that point, so when you get hooked up with a connect, I think your first I think your first thought in the process is, all right, you're getting this at a really great price. What are you paying for it at that time?
All right. So just to give you an idea, in those days in California, the average person, if they wanted to buy an ounce of Mexican brick bud, would pay 60, 70, 80 bucks, right?
Right.
Well, I could get it for 40 just if I only bought the 1 ounce. Now, if I'm buying a pound where there's 16 of them in there, then the price break went down. And, the more pounds you get, ultimately, you get price breaks at certain levels, that kind of thing. And so I was pretty well trusted because the way that I got connected was unique. I was arrested as a 16-year-old. Um, an Asian gangbanger ratted me out. I was trading marijuana for stolen stuff at that time, which was not a bright idea. And he decided to snitch out me and a few others that look like me. We'll just say he didn't rat out any Asians. We'll just put it that way. And so I was arrested for some car theft, kind of out prowling kind of stuff too. And I was booked into one of the worst juvenile units in the state of California at the time. It was meant as a lockdown unit. It was meant as a punishment unit. And the only frame of reference I could say at the time was it reminded me of the inside of Alcatraz. It was the old style. It was so old that they didn't even have electronic locks. And within 1 hour of being booked in there, I'm in there with a white dude and a Mexican dude, and they tell me, "You see the three black guys across from us? As soon as these counselors, open up the doors and walk away, we're going at them." And I guess that means me too, right?
Yeah.
And of course, and the three black dudes across from us had committed a very heinous crime. They shot a Christmas shopper at a local mall in front of his baby sister. Um,
Wow.
I was arrested in, I want to say, February or so of 1992 when I was 16 years old, almost 17. They were arrested in December of 1991 during the Christmas season. So they weren't liked as it is. And in California, if you smack a high profile inmate, that's a freaking instant, up. And when sure enough, we went at him. It wasn't some dramatic, fight you see in those stereotypical movies. It was only 10 seconds or so. The counselors knew there was already issues between these guys, so they jumped right back in and split us up. And a month or so later, when I was out, a Mexican dude I didn't recognize at all said, "Hey, what's up, man? I recognize you." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, from there, from where?" And he said, "Aren't you the white dude that was in A unit at juvenile hall a while back? You and your homeboys got in a squab with some of those," and I won't say the word he
Yeah.
used to refer to these guys as. And I'm like, "Yeah, that's me." So he was the one who actually, one of his friends, he started, that the guy was a gang member, a Mexican gang member, a Bulldog, which was an offshoot of the Nuestra Familia. By then, they had split off from the NF. They had their own internal turmoil in the Mexican organized crime world at the time. They decided to break away. So he introduced me to the cartel stuff. That's how that got started. So I get well connected, and by then I'm able to get a pound for approximately 400 or so. That's 16 ounces. And, you know, I was able to sell ounces, and it just kind of evolved from there.
Wow, that's a good price from back then. So isn't it crazy though how that one fight when you were in lockup kind of led to putting you in the position to have this this plug and this connect to kind of take you on, where your life took you after that?
Well, absolutely, and it's not like I expected anything from it. When I was in the cell, keep in mind these people have heard of the shoe out here, secure housing unit. These were shoe cells. They were designed for one guy. They had three of us in there, so they
Yeah.
were small. We had we had bunks, and then one dude had to sleep on the ground. And my cellies were cool. I got along with them. We were cool with each other. I told him a joke. The first thing I said to him was, "Wow, this doesn't look like a happy place." And I cracked a joke, and they started busting up, and they thought it was the funniest thing ever. And they were like, "Oh man, you're cool. What's up, bro?" But the that's how it works though. Sometimes you do something and other people take notice.
Yeah.
And so that's what got it where, and also they could tell the guys, "Hey, look, I was this dude ain't no snitch or no rat. He was sitting in the worst unit. He was ready to go to Preston, which was a terrible youth authority at that time out here. It's been torn down. I was ready to go if the judge would have, I went to court and I didn't snitch out the Asian gangster that ratted me out. I could have easily just said, you know what, F him, and I could, name five, six others. I didn't snitch out any of the Asian dudes either, and they actually shook my hand later on too, tell me, "Don't worry, we'll take care of the issue ourselves." Just because he ratted out a white boy doesn't mean nothing to us. That's still ratting.
Right.
So
So when you're doing this, obviously when you're getting at that kind of price, the more profit you turn, you're going to reinvest. Transportation usually becomes the key of how to do it and move more. It's kind of like the movie Blow, if you ever watched that. To start with, it was in suitcases. Then eventually he went and stole an airplane. They were traveling in airplanes, and then it just kind of grows from there. What was the progress as far as like as you grew in the business? What was the ways you guys transported it?
well, I didn't steal any airplanes, and if I would have tried that one, there would have I would have been on the news, but not for being busted.
No, well, and I say that because I don't know if in the movie it elaborated that they actually did that, but in the book, he details that they actually went to, an airstrip, and I'm not talking about like a jumbo jet airliner or nothing, just some of those little private planes like that they flew. They just acted like they were working on one and basically hopped in it and hot wired it and stole it. and
Yeah, no,
when
I
it
could
becomes
imagine.
illegal.
So another thing they did, at the higher levels was they would buy planes that are on their last legs at auctions, knowing it's they only need it for one flight. I'm
Yeah,
talking the big smugglers, right?
yeah,
Old Boeing. Speaking of funny planes on their last legs,
yeah,
Boeing with the old Boeings at the back then. Boeing made much better aircraft.
yeah.
Uh, there was a little bit better workmanship, but a little bit less corruption probably. They would do a one-way thing. Now with me, I was moving when I started getting into the interstate stuff. We would move 10 or 20 pounds at the low end, and up to the highest amount I ever did was about 250. Now that sounds like quite a bit, but the DEA would have still put me at like a level 3, trafficker. They were looking at the guys moving 10,000 or
Right.
20,000, 30,000 regional smugglers, right? But just to give you an idea, with the lower level stuff, you we would take it on Amtrak and Greyhound buses because we could fit about 20 to 30 pounds into the bigger duffel bags and be able to wrap it up and put spices or whatever else. We'd vacuum seal them sometimes. We had
Okay,
different things
that's what
we
I
could
was
do.
gonna ask if you had them vacuum sealed, I would
And,
imagine
oh
you would.
yeah, look, they used to have those back then. The first commercials, 1995 plus shipping ahead. Imagine vacuum sealing your meat,
Yeah,
vacuum sealing your fish. I'm thinking vacuum sealing my weed. So when I heard that commercial, I was like, all right, I think we're onto something here. But yeah, so we would take it on buses and trains. Now, the mob that I was connected to was the Detroit Syndicate, and the so that's about a 2.5 day trip from my part of California. So it's not the easiest trip to make, but if you're younger, right? I wouldn't want to sit on a Greyhound now.
no
I,
shit.
but with that, we would, just take it and,
Well, I don't know what the
we
amount of money you're making in this trip. I might sit on there for that month.
well, the truth is there was quite a bit because we could get decent quality Mexican brick bud here that was kind of stony. We used to get this stuff sometimes called AZ because it came from traffickers in Arizona. I used to get it from Tijuana guys, whatever, too, and sometimes just regular white dudes that were high level. It's a very fluid business. I didn't just have one connect. Sometimes guys disappear. Sometimes guys go to prison, then you're back to square one and you're not even doing anything for 2 3 months but trying to
Right,
meet somebody new, right? So you take it on a bus. We would, the bus trip to Michigan, was to Detroit specifically, was about 2.5 days. With Amtrak's, we could get like a sleeper car and two or three of us could pack up 20, 30 into duffel bags and do that. And we would pretend like we were just 18-year-olds running away from the home, except you're not under 18. So you're not really a runaway anymore. You're technically an adult. If a cop or troopers would board the buses and ask where you're heading to and why. I'm 18. My dad told me to get the hell out of the house and go get a job, and so I'm going to the Midwest and seeing if I can get a job here or there, that kind of stuff. So, but when you get to the bigger amounts, 100, 200, you got to start taking that in vehicles. At least that's what we did. One of the things that we would do too is we would rent like a Ryder truck or a U-Haul, and we would buy a bunch of furniture and other stuff from the Goodwill, just cheap crap, right? And we wanted to typically buy stuff that had the weight of it listed on the tags,
right,
and then we would hollow this stuff out, shove things in there. And the reason why we wanted that was because if we got pulled over in, let's say, Utah, where they're extremely strict, right, or
right.
back in Colorado and Nebraska, Kansas, Iowa, states like that, where the sentences were really large for what we were doing, we could always, if a state trooper said, hey, what do you got going on in there, we could just say, look, officer, um, this U-Haul weighs X amount. You can see the owner's manual in the glove box. It'll tell you how many, tens of thousands of pounds, whatever that the U-Haul weighs, whatever it might be. And we've got some couches back there, blah blah blah. They all have the tags on them. And so if a cop ever challenged us and made an accusation, you could say, hey, check this out. There's a weigh station up the way that you guys use to weigh diesels
Yeah.
in their loads. We'll tell you what, we'll go ahead and drive the Ryder truck up to the weigh station. You guys can add up how much the Ryder truck weighs. You can look at all the tags on our furniture and whatever else, add it all up. And if it comes out anything different than that, we're carrying something we're not supposed to be. And that way, you got to be proactive if you're pulled over by law enforcement. You have to put them in a position because they try to trap you with certain questions.
Right.
They try to get you locked into certain stories. Like they'll start off with, you don't happen to be carrying anything that you're not supposed to have, like, guns and, a bazooka. They'll throw out ridiculous stuff,
Yeah.
bazooka, blah, blah, because they want you to say, no, I'm not.
Yeah.
So that anything you have illegal from there, no matter how small, is you lying to them. And then they have a justification to get a warrant.
Yep.
So we would throw that stuff right back at them if we were in that
You
situation. We
give
would
them the
say,
answers
add it
before
up.
they can even answer give you the questions, basically.
Yeah, we'd throw the question back to him, like, "Oh, come on, officer, that's some funny stuff." Tell you what, the bazookas and all that back there. Take it to the weigh station and add in the bazookas and all that along with the Ryder truck, and then and they would, you throw it back at them, a challenge back at them. A lot of times, state troopers don't expect that stuff. You got to throw them off of their game
Right.
when you deal that. Another thing we would do, bro, is like we would with the Amtrak and Greyhound stuff is we would buy the tickets to, let's say, Detroit, but we would actually meet somebody in Chicago in the restroom and do a bag switch underneath the stall and have them switch out a bag that's the same brand, wrapped, with actual clothes and stuff in it. So it's the same size so that if surveillance agents were watching us doing the trip,
See anything different.
they would think that, you went to take a number two and you walk right back out, and little they know you switch the bag out and then some other dude's driving from Chicago to Detroit.
Now, when you're going to Detroit, are you meeting like members of their mob down there?
My main thing was meeting, well, it was mainly to drop the stuff off. And I actually was more when we started moving the stuff. Originally, I was just doing middleman stuff
Right.
and tacking $100, $200 on each pound. And at a certain point, they said, "Hey, you want to, you want to make extra money? Do your friends want to make extra money?" And sometimes, it's like, "Yeah, sure." So it wasn't there to go meet and do that because you're going to get if they're following. We had to assume we're going to be followed at all times. One of the first things the first mob guy that I met told me was, "You're going to have to assume you're on camera 24/7,
Right.
and you have to operate sort of like a casino cheat, like the MIT blackjack team. You have to be able
Yeah.
to walk into a casino, and everything you do has to appear to be normal." And so that if someone's watching, so we weren't there to freaking sit down in a social club and it's bad for security reasons to have everybody meeting anyway. So I would drop it off to, sometimes they would say, "Hey, I want you to meet the guy you're going to meet's going to be wearing this and that. He's my guy. Just call him by this name." And drop it off, and then we'll handle the money part now, or we might do it later when you get back.
Yeah, that's
Things
what I
like
was gonna ask. When did the money like change place? Because a lot of times you don't want the money and the product in the same place. That way, if there is a bust or whatever, you at least save money or whatever.
Yeah, well, we had different ways to transfer cash. One of the things that we would do is we would use the U.S. Postal Service. We would have it where a woman in Michigan sends a car seat to a pregnant woman in
Yeah.
California that I know. So they have a woman they know send a car seat, but we've opened it up. They've stashed the money in here, there. Now keep something in mind too if you're ever going to do this method. You have to also hollow out the exact amount of stuff so that if postal inspectors put it on a scale, that it doesn't weigh more than what the package weighs. Because keep in
Right.
mind, every $100 bill weighs about a gram roughly.
Right.
So if let's say the package says that it's supposed to that the box and what's in there is 36 ounces, let's say. If it's 36 ounces and you know 25 grams, they're gonna know something's been put in there. and
Right.
then they're going to use that to get a warrant, open it up. They'll see what you got in there, and then they'll repackage it. They'll send it to you, let you sign for it, and you're
And
in
they'll,
deep trouble.
yeah, then
So
they'll be
you have to
there.
hollow it out as well. You have to make it where that the pack, and you need to reweigh it, and you need to repackage it perfectly. Any mistakes, and those guys are trained to look for that stuff.
Yeah.
Or they would just pay me the next time they came out because they could take it through airport metal detectors.
Right.
Just keep in mind they'd have to buy weed with it, with money. We'd have to get it from our Mexican friends, so they'd have to fly out here. Well, you got to pass through an airport metal detector, and you could imagine $100 bills are the same width and length as a one, so right there's about 1,000.
Yeah.
So it's not too much to get 20. It's not that much, 20,000 or 10,000 or whatever.
You mentioned earlier when you were doing them on like Greyhound buses and Amtrak's, was there ever any close calls doing this?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things that I discovered the hard way is that state troopers and local cops are allowed to board those buses. They don't need warrants. They can literally ask everybody, we want to see your tickets to see where you're all going. They can also ask everybody to open up their carry-on luggage. Sounds unconstitutional. However, if keep something in mind, the Fourth Amendment isn't the same in every state. The
Right.
Fourth Amendment the federal courts have said standards, but cops in Colorado may have certain state court rulings that have limited them, whereas Kansas's, Supreme Court has said they can do more, right?
Right.
Well, they would board buses, and let's just say they say, "Hey, open up your bags." And you're the one guy that says, "I'm sorry, but I can't open up my bag." That's a dead giveaway you're doing something wrong, and what they're going to do is they're going to say, "Okay, we're taking him off the bus. Don't worry, we're not going to open up your bag right now, and everybody else can get going. But we're going to have you sit with us as we get a warrant to open up your bag." So it's going to make you stand out. I was searched in Vegas one time. I was on a bus, and my one of my mob friends was at the back of the bus. I was in the middle. He was carrying some, and so was I. And these Vegas metros board the bus, and Las Vegas at the time was not the kind of place to get caught with weed at. The penalties in Vegas were worse than some of the southern states in Nevada. All right.
Yeah.
Same thing with Sheriff Arpaio's Maricopa County in Arizona. You don't want to get caught there in the 90s either, or you'll end up wearing pink underwear, breaking rocks on a chain gang in the 120-degree Arizona heat, which I hear is not so fun. So they came on and did a baggage check and a ticket check, and some chick was sitting next to me, and the only thing I could think of doing was start to flirt with her. She had her coat on her lap, and I had the bag with the stuff. I had carry on that had nothing in it other than shavings, that kind of stuff, and toothbrush, just so you could get cleaned up as you're on the trip. And I had a little bit of the bag of pot. That the duffel bag was stuffed, and I had it under the seat, but it's right at the seat level. So and I couldn't quite get it all underneath. So let's just say 2.5, 3 inches of it is still sticking out. So what I did was I started flirting with her while they were still searching the people in the front, and she went along with it. And I grabbed her coat and I put it over my lap too.
Yeah.
And then by the time they got to us, it looked to the cops like this is a couple of 18, 19-year-old lovebirds,
Yeah.
kind of thing. And she was an okay looking chick anyways, but she wasn't super hot. But hey, she was hot enough to help me hide from the cops, and she didn't even know it. Thank you to whoever you are to this day. If you happen to recognize me, I appreciate you helping me out. Sorry I didn't compensate you for it, but I couldn't tell you what I was doing.
So, say if you're on a bus and it gets pulled over and they do find something in one person's luggage, at that point, do they search the entire bus?
They're still going to search. In fact, they're more likely to, because they're going to assume there's more than one courier.
So imagine like the shit luck if you and then you got a buddy in the back, both of you got, however many pounds, and then there's some idiot that's got like a half ounce that he's carrying to his brother-in-law's to get high with, and they find that, and then that's gonna lead them to y'all too. I mean, that would be like that would be my luck if I was doing something like that.
That has happened to me. That has happened, actually.
So do you
I've
have to
been
claim that? Like, is there some sort of tag that you would have that would
Well,
tie you to that
what
luggage?
happened, bro, was, a couple of stoner idiots, like, 2, freaking Beavis and Butthead morons from the 90's. They dropped like a small bag of coke or crank, just maybe like a 8 ball, whatever. It wasn't. I didn't see it, but the cops boarded and they pulled it up. That's for
They
sure.
seen it.
There was this one time, the reason why the police came on the bus was because the idiots dropped it, left it on their seat while during one of the layovers, and the bus driver saw it. So of course hey, call the cops. I got to freaking have them come out and grab this. And that led to a search. Yeah,
So
yeah. So I have actually had that happen.
do you have a tag or something that ties you to that bag? I mean, I know like now, for instance, when you get on an airplane and you check a bag or something at the top, they'll give you a little a tag or something to know that that's your luggage. Do you have anything tying you to that bag? Because like if you don't and they do start searching, they find it, I'm gonna be like, I don't know who the hell's bag that is.
If you check your luggage in, yes, because if you check your luggage into a Greyhound where they have to put it underneath the bus, then of course they have to have a tag because you have to claim it later, and they don't want someone stealing your stuff for regular people, right?
But you could
Well,
toss that tag.
yeah. Now, when it comes to what you're carrying on, I don't know the exact laws, but I would imagine that if it's within a certain vicinity of you, like under your seat, just say, they're going to open it and they're going to look to see if there's evidence that it could be you. Like, are there
Right.
clothes that fit you? Are there clothes that are your size?
Yeah.
So maybe you could throw them off by putting in clothes that would never fit you. And I don't know who this midget is that this bag could be, you
Nothing
know,
but
but
windows
uh,
closing.
you know, yeah, you can't do the women's clothes thing anymore because although you could probably say, hey, don't discriminate against me.
Yeah,
I'm,
nowadays you could. You
you
can get
know,
away with that no
yeah, you
problem
could.
nowadays.
True, true, true. Back then, they would have been like, "Yeah, no thanks, bro. Good try." But nowadays, you might even be able to threaten them with a lawsuit to
Big
keep your
J. Edgar
stuff.
Hoover fan. What do you want from me?
Yeah, I've always liked the FBI, and J. Edgar Hoover has quite an intriguing story.
What's like the biggest load? Did you ever lose a big load?
No,
No,
never.
never. Never had to
If I
dump
would
it or
have lost
anything like
one, I would have been in jail and prison
that? Yeah.
by definition.
Um, so you said the biggest one was what, a couple of 100 pounds?
Yeah.
How are you
Now, I did
transporting that,
have
like
times where
RV
I
or
flew where guys would fly out and the guys we were supposed to meet, all of a sudden I don't hear from them.
right,
That's a bad position because you got a dude that's flying out here. He's already taken a risk. That's a conspiracy case at that point. Whether
right,
you get something or not, you've now done a conspiracy. And if the DEA or the feds or locals are watching, they could still say he attempted to. We have a wiretap. We heard him on the phone, whatever. You never know. But I had a backup for that stuff. Once I had it happen once, and I had to scramble. I was supposed to get them, I want to say 25, 30 pounds from one dude. And after a day or two of freaking, uh, I got a hold of a different guy who happened to be sitting on 10 or 12 pounds, it was. And I'm like, I'll clear it out. And then the mob guys were like, that's good enough. We'll make a profit off that. So in the future, what I started doing was I took money that I would made and I would just stock up a buffer amount of 10 pounds or so, and I'd have him sitting at my neighbor's house. He was a video game repairman and a hoarder and a complete alcoholic. So he had no clue a lot of the stuff. He has no clue how much weed he stored for me inside those video game cabinets in his garage that were collecting dust. So I would just, stash them there and I would have a backup in case. And then, of course, I kept my own local sales because I wasn't just trafficking. I was still doing local sales with
right.
my, I was making money. I was doing just fine with that. And so, I'd stock up and I'd keep my bigger amounts there and keep something small in case when I lived at my mother and father's house at one point, especially with them, I didn't want if we got raided, that would be bad,
Right.
especially your own parents' house when you're 17, 18 years old and all that. But I would stash it most of the bigger amounts elsewhere and keep enough to to have enough where I wouldn't have to constantly go back to the main place I had it, so that kind of thing.
So you've got a cartel supplier, then buyers that are mixed in with the mob. Like at any point, and you're at a fairly young age here while you're doing this. At any point, did it ever, sink in that I'm getting in pretty deep? These are some heavy hitters. If something was to go wrong, it's a lot easier to get rid of me. And did you ever have any of those thoughts, or was it just strictly
Oh,
pedal to the metal?
the only times, okay, so keep the only times I even got remotely nervous was like the aforementioned when a guy would not be available and would
Right,
not call us back or anything. We dealt with pagers back then. I
right.
also used to hack regular phones. I used to use CB antennas, the ones that magnet mount onto cars, and I
Yeah,
had it plugged into a handset for the old 90's cordless phones. And
yeah,
I'd pull up in front of a house and see if I could make a signal to their base station in the house. That way I would make a drug call from a regular civilian's phone. So that's another reason why I probably stayed off the FBI's radar screen, because there would have been no way to tap me unless they were following me that moment, and they would have to get the right frequency as well, and they'd have to hit the same base station at the same time I'm talking in order to get me. Or I would have had to been dumb enough to tap into a phone that's already being tapped, because
yeah.
if I did that to a drug dealer's house unknowingly, right? And that would be a really, I mean, no one mind bad luck. That could have happened. But the so the scariest moment actually for me was so the mob dealt with Middle Easterners in Michigan. They had Chaldeans. They were Chaldean Christians. They were from Saddam Hussein's old Iraq and Syria and places like that. Dudes were hardcore. They were the ones who did all the front stuff. And we all answered to the mob basically. Some of my crew guys were Chaldeans. Anyhow, we are waiting for our Mexican friends to arrive. They were a couple of them were out here. One dude that I knew, one dude that I had just met, and we were watching TV. And I want to say this was in 1993 or 1994, probably 1994. But we were watching the news, and one of those uh, back in the day, terrorists used to strap vests to themselves and go into Israel and do something in the cafe. Well, we were watching one of those on the news, and I made the statement: the Israelis are going to f those mfers up. And I had forgotten that I'm in a room with two Middle Easterners who are not big fans of Israel. And almost immediately, like, it's just the dumbest thing I should never have freaking said, right? And one I didn't know said, "What'd you say?" And the only thing I could think of doing was I said, "You heard what I said. I said the Israelis are going to F them up." Now, I'm not saying that's what I want the Israelis to do. I'm telling you how the Israeli government is.
Yeah.
I said it's not my personal opinion. I'm just telling you the way that's how they are. And then he thought about it. He's like, "Yeah, that's what they are going to do." But that was actually one of the because I felt like he was going to step in front of the hotel room door and block the block the door now. And I had a few others, but but that was actually one of the moments, like, other than law enforcement close calls, that was actually one of the scariest moments that I had. As far as, so it's ironic that it really didn't have anything to do with the business itself. We
Right.
had one time too where um me and one of the Chaldean guys, he was out here, and we are going to meet Mexican dudes in a barrio neighborhood, right? Worse than the one I grew up in, right? And we parked way down the street, and we're walking up to the house we're supposed to meet at, and I see the Mexican dude that I know and another dude, and they put on their hoods. They're this is the winter time. Back then we all wore like starter jackets, right?
Right.
And they put their hoods over their heads. And my bro's like, "You see that? We're gonna get jacked." They're putting their hoods on. I go, "No, no, 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 no. You know, let's just go. Let's see what happens." And we didn't get jacked, but when you see homeboys that don't give a shit about the mob They don't care, so what?
Yeah.
Mexican guys run the federal prison system. They're not scared of Italian mobsters, and they weren't back then. The Mexican mafia, the ABs, and then the Nuestra Familia. Those are like, the top. You could throw DC Blacks. There's a few other groups, but within the top five, three of them are out of California that run the federal system because of the numbers, right?
Mhm.
So they're not scared of Italian dudes from back east at all. In fact, they protect them behind bars in the federal system. So they got nervous, but I no no no. One reason why I was like, just keep walking towards them. I knew where one of their mothers lived and all that, so I was like, if we get jacked, just hand them the money. I didn't say this because we're walking down the street and that's what I was thinking though. If we do get robbed, and freaking just hand it over, we can always go seek revenge later.
Right.
But it didn't, they just were putting their hoods on because they weren't sure, what if these guys are police? I don't know, or narcs. We went into a pad and we stripped down, they picked up our pants and stuff to make sure there was nothing. They looked at our belt buckle, all that kind of stuff. The high security, especially when you're doing stuff like that. So that was another point where we were sort of nervous, but it was more my guy was nervous more than me. Um, the I I was one of the first times I saw Detroit, I was sort of nervous because I could not believe how screwed up a city looked. We're barrio neighborhoods in California. At least we have, we it's typically an older home, and you get with fences in the front. You've
Yeah.
seen, even like in Compton or East LA or East Side Fresno or Parkside Fresno, you're going to see that. But you go to Detroit, I'm looking near the Greyhound station, and I'm seeing buildings that were burnt down and houses that were burnt. And I'm like, bro, how come every like fourth house here has been burnt down? And the dude explained to me, oh, every Halloween, the black dudes just burn the houses down for no reason. They call it Devil's Night or whatever. And I'm like, what? I go, bro, prosecutors in California would throw us into Corcoran for that. Prosecutors up and down the state would never tolerate that out here. I mean, they would have built a prison for, if that stuff was happening. Not anymore, but back then we had a tough on crime, three strikes era, California.
Yeah, Detroit's history with criminal activity, man, is crazy. I mean, you had the Pony Down Gang, the Curry brothers, Maserati Rick. I mean, there was a lot of big time players come out of it was I don't know if that was Young Boys Inc. or whichever one it was. I mean, there was a lot of big time drug smugglers around there. Were you strictly marijuana? You never did graduate in anything else, or
So I sold crank locally for a while because at the time crank was a fairly new West Coast kind of thing, and in fact, it really got started in my region. But I was asked one time, can you get blow? And I did look into it. However, the only dudes that I knew that could get it could only get like up to a pound or something, which isn't worth it. In
yeah?
Michigan, they had this law back then where if you had 650 grams of coke or more, automatic life sentence.
Oh shit!
So if you're going to carry coke into Michigan, you better do it big because you're
Yeah,
getting life no matter what.
yeah. Life, no matter
And
what. So you can try to make
and
a ton of money while you're doing it.
right, and the one time I I made a really stupid mistake talking on an interstate phone doing this, but I I went to a Mexican dude that I had known had been involved with smaller coke sales and had him look into it, and he came back and said, "I can't get you that much blow, but I can get you up to a few hundred pounds of crank." And so, we're 200 pounds of crank, bro. That's a pretty big freaking amount.
Oh yeah,
And I called my guys back. I said, "Nah, I can't really. I looked into. I can't really do that. All I can do is get a shit ton of R." And I just said a shit ton of R or something like that. CR crank.
yeah.
They said we used to call CO Cokes O or CO, or in crank we would call it CR or just R. I can't get any. I can't do the O, but I can get an R. And he didn't know what I was talking about. He said, "What crack?" And we're on an interstate freaking phone here. Who the hell's going to move 200 pounds of crack? Okay, move it as coke, then make the crack later,
Yeah.
right? You know, you're gonna get 5 gram rule back then. That'd be really stupid to rock up 200 pounds and then move it. You know, I'm like, no, no, the stuff that keeps you up all night. And he still didn't know what I was talking about because it hadn't really been a phenomenon there yet, right?
Right.
And and then finally I said, no, 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 crank. I go, you guys got bikers back there? Yeah, yeah. I go, it's the shit that the bikers fucking snort up. Then he thought about it. He's like, oh, okay, yeah, yeah, yes, the speed shit. Yeah, real smart of me and him to freaking be saying this, over an interstate phone, but apparently the DEA wasn't listening that day.
Yeah.
But still, it just, so I looked into it and it never happened. And, I did get into the dank business, Humboldt, Mendocino. They call it, I won't say the word because we're trying to be YouTube friendly, but MURDER Mountain.
Right.
And then the eastern part of my county is in the Sierra Nevadas, which is also a great growing area. Similar climate as the, Pacific Northwest in my state in Oregon, and I still have friends to this day that one dude's legit now has a great cannabis shop up there in Oregon and has been in the business. I met him as a kid, and but so I did some of that locally too, and a little bit of that interstate, but that stuff smells so freaking big that it's
Yeah.
just not a bright idea, at least with what I was doing. The brick bud is also more condensed, and it's just you can package more of it in a smaller container.
So we had a guy on the show. That's probably one. I think at the time it was one of our longest episodes we had ever done. But his name's Tim McBride, and he was basically just a prolific marijuana smuggler. It was down in Florida. I always butcher the name of this island, but it's like Otroklusky or something like that. Pretty much the whole town was stone crabbers and pot smugglers. Like they would stone crab during the day and offload pot at night. And, he had like, I want to say like a 25-year career doing this. And he was like, he said, I never carried a gun. I never lost a load. I never got robbed. And the way he does that math, he's got the math broke down. And I think I made a short out of it one time and put it up there. But it was like once you pull off one successful load, you can lose the next 31 loads. And as long as you got that number 32, that 30-second load, you would still make money. And he's like, so at that level, he said, it's a lot of money. He said, but it's not the kind of money that these Coke deals are for. He said, so I
No.
never had to worry about getting robbed or getting a good put on. He's like, who's going to want to kill you if you're making them that kind of money? And he's like, but now you quadruple that times 100. Yeah. Then you might want to put a bullet in somebody's head and just keep it or whatever else. But he's like, what we're doing here is not worth, that happening. And it made perfect sense because I think as long as you're staying at that level, people are more appreciative of what you're doing. If that makes, even though you're talking about it in these circumstances, you're kind of a guy that they don't want to have to replace. You know what I'm saying? You've got the trafficking down pat. You've got how to, get it from A to B down pat. So it's more of a hindrance to get rid of you and try to get somebody else. And even if they did, like, what are you really gaining? You know what I'm saying? When most of the people that you're probably dealing with have their hands in other pies that bring in a lot more cash than that.
Yeah, I didn't carry weapons. In fact, a lot of times we actually had a no gun rule because of sentencing enhancement
Right.
laws. You can get a ton more time just for having guns within the vicinity of a drug deal.
Oh, yeah.
So even our Mexican friends would be like, no guns, but you better believe we're all going to have friends right down the way in a vehicle where
Yeah.
so there's going to be a tank, so to speak, down the street. We'll have one as well. Don't worry. You keep your tank away from mine, so to speak, and we're all good when we do the transaction. No, I never lost one, never got jacked or anything like that. The mob had a situation once, and this is just a story that I was told. Um, they got There was a group of black guys that were in Detroit that were wearing DEA vests and doing these home invasions. And this was I was told this story, I want to say February of 1994. And basically what happened was they robbed a group of Chaldeans and Italians, and the the mob was super mad, of course, right? And they asked around, they found out who was doing it, and freaking they busted in on them. They took their stuff right back and then some, and the money they'd already sold some of it to get. and whatever else they had. And what was crazy, bro, was I watched an episode of FBI Files a few years later, and I saw a story about that same crew and how the FBI took that crew down. I'm like, oh, those must be the black dudes that my bros freaking had to go back and teach a valuable lesson on honesty about. And yeah, it was that's something else too when you start seeing your friends in situations you've heard of on the FBI files.
Yeah.
That's a unique thing. But I no guns. No, I didn't. I did practice shooting and stuff, but I lost my Second Amendment rights. I was involved with thefts and stuff. I got arrested in February of '94, and I was convicted by about March, and I lost my Second Amendment rights. So as far as the government's concerned, I haven't touched a gun since then.
Right. Now, what was did you ever get busted during the smuggling?
No, came
No.
close numerous times. There was this one time where my bro and I were on our way into Detroit. We got lucky as can be. There was some kind of an issue with the bus where it broke down or something. And I want to say this was very around Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is a college town that's
Right.
west of Detroit on Interstate 94 there.
Yeah, the Wolverine
And
territory.
the bus broke down, and so it threw off the timetable that little did we know, but a task force, DEA, feds, and locals were waiting for us, and so it threw off their timetable. When they do a public thing like that, they do things like they know when the bus is supposed to arrive, so they prep just beforehand, and get into
Right.
position so they can walk up. Then they'll ask you like, "What are you carrying? What you got? You need to come with us," kind of thing. And they're plain clothes, right? So we got delayed by a few hours or something, and it turned out that because of that, they obviously have to reset their, all right, we're going to have to do the trap this way. So when we were coming in, we land in Detroit at the Greyhound station there. And I remember I'm carrying, I want to say 18 and a half pounds. It was just under 20. We were supposed to get, the Mexican dudes had sold some out from underneath while we, waiting. So I had that, and then my other guy had something in there too, 15 pounds roughly, something like that. And I just remember I'm walking by, and I see this guy who looks like he's looking past me, right? And what he was doing was he was looking at the bus numbers to see which one had just pulled up. And all of a sudden, my mob friend just bolts in front of me and signals to me, you know, and then he runs out the door. So I just ran behind, right? And he hops into a cab, doors open, tells me, get in. We hop in, he busts out $100 bill. And I've told this on one or two podcasts or broadcasts before, but basically he told the cab driver, step on it. This is back when minimum wage was like 4.25 in California, which means it was probably a buck or two an hour in Michigan. So $100 was a lot for a cabbie. And he said, drive, just do what I say. And he told him, he said, bro, we're running late. I gotta meet my girl. I got a hot ass girlfriend. I'm gonna get dumped if I don't get there. And so the dude thought he was taking us to go see this dude's chick, and he's like, hell yeah, no problem. Freaking, he was on it, right? So he'd be like, go 4 lights this way and make a right. Go 3 lights here, make a left, make one more quick left, and then a quick, just doing that kind of stuff, right? And then finally we stop in front of a brick building, which in the neighborhoods there, they have brick houses in Michigan, which is something we don't see a lot of out here anymore.
Yeah.
But they had brick houses, and he paid him, signals to me to get out. We freaking get out and like hopped the fence and opened up like the outside of uh, the opening to go underneath the house, and threw it in there, and then hopped another fence around, blah blah, and then finally, like, what the hell's going on? And he's all, we were set up, and he said the big four were there. That's the word he used. It's a TAC unit or something from there. Yes, multi-state. And he was right, because when I left Michigan the next day on a bus, I had 2 agents come up to me. One of them looked like a stereotypical kind of biker guy. He had a long beard, white dude, older. And then the other dude looked like an Italian, but he could pass for Puerto Rican or Mexican. One of those chameleon kind of agents that could probably infiltrate lots of different groups. And they asked me for my ID. I just said I don't have one. I told them, I'm not driving right now. I don't have to have one. This is before 9/11 and all that. So 1994, and they said, let's see your ticket. And I had bought it under an assumed name. So I just said, yeah, no problem. Also, I bought it to Los Angeles rather than Fresno. So they looked at it and they're like, oh, so you're one of those LA boys, huh? I'm like, yeah, dude. And I did the surfer. Yeah, bro. Freaking, yeah, just can't wait to get back to the waves, dude. Kind of thing. And like, all right, no problem. And they just obviously had their agents in LA wait for, and they probably had agents at the different stops, watching, observing to see if I shake hands with anybody. That's how it is.
Right.
And, so that was an extremely close call. That was the closest that I think that the DEA or the FBI ever got to really getting me, other than after the mob stuff was over in the year 2005. There was a big time bust out here, and I got lucky, avoided that. However, I had already been away from mob activities just after 9/11 or so. I was already winding down, but I still had local weed stuff going for a while. And I was getting into my career because I was a college student. I graduated, and I was slowly like handing over my pot business to dudes I knew and introducing them to my customers and stuff like that. And back to your point, real quick, of getting clipped and all that, there's a very easy way to ensure that you don't get clipped. You have to be valuable. And
Right.
so one thing I didn't do was introduce them to the other dudes out here. I would introduce them to bros I trusted, but it would just be while they're here, while I'm in front of them, so that
Yeah.
they can't talk behind my back. Like, this is so and so. And now the guy that introduced me to the mob, he was from Michigan originally and moved out here as a kid. And I met him in elementary school, lost track with him. Then we met up again when we were both taggers, were into vandalism and stuff during that early 16, 17-year-old phase, GTA phase. And he moved back to Michigan when I was 18 and he was like 17. And so he did try to introduce them to other dudes that we all knew, but none of those guys were able to produce anything like I could. They weren't able to get the amounts that I was able to get.
So was it more or less the crackdown on everything? Because after 9/11, like, I know a lot of people think that the focus shifted on terrorism, which it did, but it still had to put a lot of heat because, you're not going to get stuff in the same way. A lot of things are going to be looked at as far as transportation and stuff like that. So the focus may have been on terrorism, from another country, but it still made things a lot harder to get for drug dealers, doing stuff like that. Was that kind of the driving force to get you to get completely out of that?
No, but you're correct though. I was already planning to pull out of all this stuff because I have two bachelor's degrees and an associate's degree from Fresno State. I went there during the Tarkanian era and party stuff, and so I was due to graduate by May of 2002, anyways.
Right.
And I already had done one or two political interns, and I couldn't become a lawyer because of my felony background.
Right.
Nowadays, it wouldn't matter, but back then, California actually enforced laws and had consequences, so I couldn't do that. So I got it. I was going to get into that. So I already was planning to leave beforehand, anyways. And ironically enough, I had set up a meet. I was saying goodbye to a lot of my old friends, and some of them, were in Mexico, and I had already set up a cruise ship, Carnival cruise, for the weekend or so after 9/11, booked way in advance, right?
Right.
And so I was just gonna, the way that the cartel stuff works, a lot of those guys come up with the during the growing season in the and mix in with the illegal immigrant
Right.
population, and as well as illegal migrant workers. And then
Right.
they make money for 6 months, and they go back down and they chill, and another guy comes up and does it for a while. That
Right.
way they don't get known by the cops in California as easily. So they were already back down there. I just was gonna be like, hey, say goodbye anyway. So I used it to take my girl at the time on a cruise along with my sister and one of her friends. And it's a nice cover story, to go
Yeah.
down there, say what's up. I got to spend some time in like Ensenada or whatever. So I was already going to wind things down. But I will say this, the border shutdown as a result of 9/11 caused a huge dry spell here. There
Yeah.
was like a good 6-week period where dudes I knew had ran out of Mexican bud and could not get any more. And I mean, everybody ran out. And what ended up happening was Humboldt, Mendocino, and the American grown stuff. That's one of the reasons why it took off quicker than it did. There was already an evolutionary process happening with people
Right.
smoking dank versus Mexican grade stuff out here. Well, with the border being shut down in a good solid 6 weeks of nothing getting through, at least guys I knew weren't getting anything. Um, that's when the guys from up north were able to say, "Well, now you're stuck paying for our stuff, and our stuff is, if you're well connected, it's 300 an ounce. If you're not, it's 400 or more."
Right.
And they don't give price breaks because they don't have to.
Yeah.
They'll sell it regardless. You buy 16 ounces at three each. Doesn't matter if you're buying in quantity, you're paying three per. You might get cut down if it's one of your really good friends.
Right.
If 400, whatever. So it opened up the dank business, closing the border on after 9/11.
And you said you were just kind of checking out of it at that time anyway.
Yeah, I had actually wanted to get rid of and stop doing it around the year 2000. Way back when I first was started, the cartel guy that I first met, his name is Marcelo, older dude. He schooled me really well, and I'm glad that other dudes, and there's at least 4 or 5 of my friends in today's world who know, Mexican dudes and white dudes who are still around who have regular careers now, and some have gone to prison and back out. Who know this guy, knew him as well. They talk to me on Facebook and say, "Hey, man, you did a great interview and you told the truth about him." But he schooled us really well when we were kids.
Yeah.
He would, literally tell us, "Do this temporarily. There's no future in this stuff. Make some money. Don't attract attention. Don't be buying a bunch of cars." That's another thing. You go look at my vehicle record. Anybody who looks at any cars I own, I never bought anything fancy. I wasn't one of these dumbasses. A lot of these Italian mobsters, I hate to say it, but they were idiots when it came to that, especially the
Yeah.
younger dudes. They're buying vehicles that they're not supposed to be able to afford based on their income on paper.
Right.
They used, Marcelo would tell us, you know, do not buy anything that your paper income cannot justify. And he would tell us too, go to school. In fact, he was, encouraged me to go to school. I got arrested, like I said, in February of '94, and one of the probation terms in California was you either get a job or you go to school. My co-defendant decided to get a job. I decided to enroll in college. And of course, first thing Marcelo told me was, now that you're at City College, they have a police academy there. You need to go into the library and you need to be reading those police manuals on how they do their surveillance stuff. You need to read cop manuals. So that he had a little bit of a motivation to also see me there. Jeff,
Yeah.
go in there. Now that you got a student library card, you got full access to all the. They used to have these really cool. They'd have the books that explaining stuff, but then they'd have these little quick kind of how-to reference, cliff notes versions for the police officers in training at the
Right.
academy at the college. So I could read. I learned where they place surveillance cars based on what the building looks like and the views and how to be surreptitious. And yeah, I used that time to do some of that, and it was very beneficial to me.
What was the longest time you ever did in prison?
I've never had to go to prison. The longest that the courts have ever gotten out of me was 100 days. About a week and a half or a week of that was in county jail, and then 90 days in a program. And even with that, it was for a misdemeanor DUI. But it still illustrates how big I was on the food chain at one point. This was in 2011, and I had not been drinking. I had no illegal drugs in my system. I had taken a very popular prescription sleeping aid, we'll call it.
Mhm.
the night before, and I didn't wait the full hours before driving. And the highway patrol, I made the stupid mistake of being honest with the cops and said, "Yeah, I took it at this time." And then they're like, "Oh, wow, the bottle says you're supposed to wait 8 hours. It's only been 7 hours, something." So I got convicted and I got fully prosecuted. And then I still had to do 90 days. When my lawyer first saw the case, he was like, "Damn, bro, if you were just Karen, the soccer mom, they would have shook your hand and asked you if you're okay, and you would have never had an issue. They're like, somebody at the DA's office doesn't like you." And I
Yeah.
said, well, if you look at my arrest record from a long time ago, I was 37, I think, when this happened, roughly. If you look at my juvenile arrests and how close I went to youth authority at certain points,
It'll
and
paint a picture.
they were getting me back because look, the cops, the DAs, and them, they're not idiots. Okay, they know that for everything that they arrested you for back then, you probably did 10 or 20 other crimes that they never found out about. And so, one of the lessons I tell young people is do not get yourself put in the system at any point, because I'm telling you right now, firsthand, they are not going to give a damn how reformed you are. You can produce college transcripts. You could be Joe Citizen for, see, I hadn't been arrested for freaking like 17 years or something. And they're going to treat you like it was the day after your previous arrest.
The sleep
If you
aid,
were somebody.
did that start with A?
Yes.
Okay, so I take that now currently just because I have
Do
really
not drive in the morning, bro, unless I'm telling you, the cops will freaking they blood tested me 3 times. I won my DMV hearing, so I didn't even lose my driver's
so
license
it
to play
doesn't
with.
it doesn't say on there though that you have to wait a certain time, but I don't know why in the hell
Oh, read the
would want
instructions.
to.
Read the
Yeah.
instructions. And if you take, and by the way, if you take Tylenol and other stuff with it, they're going to count that in. They're going to say produced a synergistic effect.
So how long are you supposed to wait before you drive a vehicle? 8 hours?
That's a safe zone. Yeah. Just read whatever it's recommended
Yeah,
and stick to it. And if you do get into anything, if you, whether you get pulled over or you sideswipe a pole or whether you run into a wall, whatever it might be, whatever it is, do not look. The cops are now trained to ask questions related to prescription meds.
right.
They will again. I should have known from my old days that they ask you trap questions. They
Yeah.
want to lock you into something. What time did you take your last medicine? And the moment you aren't going to be able to change your answer. You get, it's like a game show where you hit the buzzer and you better get the answer right. Otherwise, dun, 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 we're getting the home game version of this instead of the big win.
Yeah.
So you better give them the right answer or keep your mouth closed, even better. Say,
'Cause
I don't
I've taken Ambien like around 11 and 12 sometimes and then had to be up at 5.
don't.
But they don't affect me though like that. Like, and,
If you get into a wreck, they're going to blood test you, though.
they will put me out, but then after like 3 or 4 hours, I can wake up with no groggy effect. Now,
Yeah,
there's been some
if
other
you're
ones that I've taken in the past that, like, I think there was one called Seroquel or something like
sure.
that. Oh my god, it took me like 12 hours to get my bearings back around. Thank God I didn't have to drive while I was taking that.
Yeah, if the best thing, bro, is either wait it out or if you are asked, say, I don't take any meds that should be of any concern.
Right.
And just don't lie to them, but don't
You ain't gotta
give
tell them
them
everything
any
either.
clues. Because magically, too, the CHPs, they had, by then, they already had audio and video recorders
Right.
with the highway patrol. But magically, with me, it wasn't working at the time, right? If you look at my mugshot, which is on my YouTube page on the banner, I
Yeah.
don't look drunk at all. I don't look
Right.
stoned. The DMV even said we view you as sober, and so they didn't suspend my license. I didn't get my license suspended until after the courts actually said you're mandated to lose your license for 1 year as a result of this. Keep in mind, no, I only had to do 2 years of probation. The judge even was like, I had a hang 'em high judge, and the dude was like, when at first he assumed it was alcohol or whatever related. When my lawyer and the DA and him met in chambers, this one particular continuance hearing, he came back out, and the first thing he said was something like, "We'll see you in a month, and you have a good day, sir." And he said it really nice, right? And when we walked out, my lawyer's like, "Oh, bro, the judge was freaking mad at the district attorney." He had been assuming this whole time, all these continuances, that he was going to be hearing of you drinking heavy or high on freaking, marijuana or some illegal drug at the
Yeah,
time.
something
when
heavy.
when we told them, they did a stipulation thing where they when both sides agree to a certain set of facts,
Yeah,
and the DA and my attorney both said he had lawful prescribed medicine in his system. They both agreed there, and he said, "Oh, the judge freaking damn near was ready to throw the case out
yeah,
on that." And so I didn't even get a full DUI fine. Usually DUI fines in California are 2,000 up. And that's if you're just pulled over with a .09, right?
wow.
Well, I only had a $1,200 fine. And it was he gave me a light fine. The DA wanted to make me do a bunch of community service, and the judge told him no. The DA asked for some other 5 years probation. He said no. The DA heard no, 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 and no more than I've ever heard in a court case in my life. Usually judges rubber stamp them, but so I
Well, that's
got
because
lucky in
like
that regard. But I wasn't bitter, bro. It taught me a lesson that you've got to obey the law, even if you don't, if you think it's stupid, you
right.
still got to obey it.
Well, I think too, and there's such a crackdown on the epidemics, and recently, and you're into the, you know, YouTube genre, and you know a lot of people involved in what I would just classify as mob tube. And recently, kind of off topic of what they normally talk about, we had a little snuff on the show from Skinny Joey podcast, and we didn't even really discuss like podcasts, and all the stuff that they got going on. He spoke on his sobriety, and, I didn't even know that until because I didn't know much about Snuff himself. And that was kind of what we focused it on. And I think it's something that a lot of people struggle with. And, it's one of them things that's like, I guess I can see why there's such a big crackdown on it, because you look at all the people that we've lost to the opioid epidemic, and it is something that can get out of hand. It's one of these things that I've seen. Like, you always hear people like try heroin and then they get hooked. But I'm like, going in, heroin was a drug. You're taught, they can do this. But when it comes to opioids, you can be prescribed these by a doctor for a legit reason. You can be someone that is a straight laced dude, turn your ankle, bend a knee, blow out your knee, whatever, get put on these things, and it totally ruin your life. And I've got a friend of mine, he lived in my neighborhood, and it got a hold to him, man. He was prescribed, by a doctor. He went the course. He obviously started taking more than he was supposed to be taking. Then when they cut him off, the addiction was still there. And I don't have to tell you the road you travel down to feed that addiction. So I'm glad that he was able to come on, bring awareness to that, and it's just something that really does need to get a hold. We really need to get a hold of it as a nation. And now you got the fentanyl that's making it worse. I mean, it's just the fatalities involved with the fentanyl is just astronomical right now.
Sure, sure. I lost my sister to, she had been on meds, and she uh, had been clean, and then she relapsed. And, John A. Light lost his daughter. My
Yeah,
friend C's has lost his daughter, or pardon me, his sister. Almost everybody, this is the most ironic things that happens. Unfortunately, the negative stuff you do comes back on you or your family later on, and it happens to you. And I myself, between I was in an accident in 2002. It wasn't my fault. It was somebody not legal, we'll just say, in California or the country. Hit my car in Sacramento, and our state capital here. And it wasn't that bad of a thing, but I was able to get, prescription for Vicodins and stuff like that. And I used it to get more. Prior to that, I would college like drink and sometimes pop pills while drinking.
Yeah.
Chris Herron was a student. We're the same age. He was a student at Fresno State. I knew a lot of the basketball and football players. I used to party at the fraternity houses. I sold weed to half those guys, anyways. And and I knew Jerry Tarkanian and all that. So I u I unfortunately fell into the trap myself. I went from those to morphines, and then I found a doctor willing to prescribe me OxyContin 80s. And the when you're around, when you're in the life that I had been in, you feel like you're bulletproof because you've been through all these crazy neighborhoods, you do all this stuff, you survive, you feds, whatever. You feel like you're freaking, you really feel like you're bulletproof. You feel like when you punch guys, you're punching 5 times harder than you do, like you're on the Matrix or some shit. And you probably do. There's some adrenaline there. There's a level of confidence that's with that whole life.
Right.
So you feel like the regular rules of humanity do not apply to you.
Mhm.
And guess what? Opiates aren't going to give a shit what status you had. So I ended up getting Oxy 80s, and I was popping those things, nice buzz, whatever. I started taking more and more and more. Then I finally started trying to quit, and I discovered extremely quick how bad and how tough it is.
Right.
Now I didn't get arrested during this time, and I had plenty of cash saved up from my mob stuff and drug stuff. I used to stash it up in the mountains, and I had a one thing I used to do to avoid getting jacked by any of the gangbangers in California in my area. I always said, "Hey, yeah, I stash all the cash I get in the mountains where all the rattlesnakes are, California black bears, California mountain lions, and guys from the hood and the barrio. They can't survive in the woods like that. I was the kind of white boy I could go fishing and hunt, hiking, we'll just say, shooting and all that, even though I wasn't supposed to be shooting. I didn't shoot no guns, ATF, if any of you watching. I just watched others do it in the mountains. But so I would put it out there that, yeah, all the money I make, yeah, it's that way if they did try to jack me, yeah, 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 I'll take you up to it. Come on. Let's hop in the car. But when we get there, you're going to have to walk through the field with the potential rattlesnakes and reach your hand into the rock area
Yeah.
where I have it. And if you get bit, hey, my money ain't worth that much, is it? So yeah, that kept all. I had no problem. I never got jacked, none of that shit, bro. I was smart. In fact, that was something Marcelo told me to do back in the day. He's like, look, just tell the homeboys that put it, tell them stuff that's going to make them just not even try it. It's sort of
Yeah.
like putting up an alarm sign in front of your house, even though you don't
Yeah.
have an alarm system. Half
Yeah.
the
Just
time, the thieves see the alarm sign, they assume you got an alarm, so they move to the next one, right?
keep on
So,
going.
but I got hooked, and so I know what it's like to be rolling on the ground, going through withdrawal and all that. So when Little Snuff said that, I watched the clip on that, and I want to just say, if he sees this, Little Snuff, congratulations to you. I do know what it's like. Shout out to you. I think he said he was using Roxy's, which was the next phase after Purdue was forced to change the formula for the OC 80s.
Mhm.
So I had quit by then, and my addiction, ironically enough, is what saved me from one of the biggest marijuana operations that ended up sweeping all of my old friends off the street in 2005. There was an FBI, DEA, California Highway Patrol, State Bureau of Narcotics, local task force, big task force, right? They went after Mexican suppliers in my region, as well as the white dudes bringing the freaking high grade stuff in from up north down to us, and then the mountains east of us. And about 7 to 8 of my bros from my high school. I was 2005. I was 30 years old, so I was way out of high school. But guys, I went to high school with, they were popped, and I was at a meetup, and this was on January 31st of 2005. I was meeting, and this was, again, I was in the process of handing my customers over. I was still selling pot locally while I was popping OCs and all that. And I was at a meetup with 3 other dudes, and little did I know, but this operation called Operation Green Speaker was already getting going. And the way it got started was the DEA in the Atlanta office busted a Georgia Tech football player with 110 pounds, I want to say. For those of you who want to read the story, go to ESPN, did a show on it, and you can still see the articles to this day. But I want to say one of the cornerbacks from Georgia Tech got busted by the Atlanta DEA, and then he ratted everybody out. He said, "We're getting it all from Central California. That's where a lot of big guys in California reside. Nice location where the stuff from the high quality stuff and the Mexican stuff kind of meets." And he ratted out one of the bigger local suppliers in my region. Well, of the three dudes that were at this one house I was at, one of them became an FBI informant. And I, ironically enough, had just been off of oxys for maybe 2.5 weeks at the time. It was when I don't know how many times I had tried to quit by then, but say the 10th time I had tried to quit.
Right.
And I finally had gotten into a few weeks, and I was even barely at the point. For those of you who go through oxy withdrawal or heroin, you know what I'm talking about. You don't sleep at all for like a week. You're mentally drained. You might get a decent amount of sleep one night here and there towards the end of week two and all that. So I was at this meetup, and I'll just say this: I put something in a McDonald's bag that I shouldn't have had and put it in my trunk, and I leave. The reason why I left early was because my then wife, who's now my ex-wife, called me up. This is when the phones were flip phones and all that still, and said, "Hey, I missed my period. I believe that I'm pregnant." And turns out she was right. And so she said, I need you to come home, and I need you to stop by the store and buy me, you know how pregnant women are. They
Yeah.
want freaking ice cream and blah, blah, they're in the mood for every damn type of food you could think of. Right. So I left this meetup earlier than I would have, put my stuff in the trunk that I wasn't supposed to have. And believe me, this would have been huge felony amounts of whatever it was that I was not supposed to have. And I was speeding, and I'm in my ex-wife's mother's vehicle, and I didn't even, I had my birthday back in 2004. My license, I didn't renew it because again I was on opiates and I didn't care about life responsibilities. Rather than going to the DMV, I didn't get my license renewed, so it had expired. And I'm speeding, and I get pulled over by a traffic cop.
Mm.
And the traffic cop, of course, runs my license. He's like, "I'm sorry to tell you, sir, but your license is not valid. And that means I'm going to have to tow your vehicle." Back then, California, again, was very strict, and they didn't tolerate stuff. You get your car towed for that. And immediately I'm like, "Oh, great. I got freaking this in the trunk, in a McDonald's bag. May have been money, may have been a money mixed with some pills and stuff. Who knows what I had? We'll just say, right?" And the only thing I could think of doing was telling the officer, "Look, my old mob mentality, even though I was mentally drained, coming, just barely getting a good night's sleep, feeling like crap, my old mob superpowers, if you will, kicked in one last time of being able to handle police searches and keeping my heart rate under control and not appearing to be nervous and coming up with a good cover story." So what I said to the officer was, "No problem. I understand. But look, as you can see, this is my old lady's, her mom's car. She's got her panties and private stuff in the trunk. I don't want a bunch of tow truck scumbags sniffing my wife's underwear. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Can I just grab her personal effects?" And of course, the officer's like, "Yeah, yeah, no problem. We're towing your vehicle anyway. So, yeah, no problem." So he took me around the back, pop open the trunk. And as he's writing my ticket for expired license, he's watching me as I had a grocery bag, paper bag, and I'm slowly, as slow as possible, putting stuff in there, waiting like this, waiting for my moment to where he just turns his head slightly. And the moment I saw him, it seemed like he wasn't turning his head for crap. He's writing while he's looking right at you. And the moment I saw that he did that, I did the quickest go gadget arm swoop up possible and put it in, grab the bag, put it into the grocery bag, and I immediately grabbed some towels, put it over it, and whatever. And then I said, "Officer, um, My phone is dead. It's not working. There's a payphone across the street, which there was at this AMPM there convenience store we have out here. And I said, look, you got my car, you got my license. I'm obviously not going to be running. I can afford to pay the ticket, so that's not a problem. Can I go over there and call for a ride so that it's going to take you a while to write this? Yeah, no problem. Go ahead. So I walked the bag across the street, hopped on the payphone. I called one of my bros who had also been in the business and knows about all this stuff. Like, hey, I need you to come pick me up. I told him where. He said, all right, I'll come get you. And then I just set the bag down by the payphone and I walked back across the street without the bag and waited there, and for him to finish my ticket and tow my stuff. Well, little did I know, but the DEA and the FBI, that gave them unfettered access to my vehicle. And they probably were watching, that house. At the time, the three individuals, none of them had snitched yet. So they didn't know they were being watched. They were still big time marijuana guys. And in fact, I talked to one of them earlier today, and he told me, "Bro, I don't want to go on YouTube for any interviews. I'm trying to I'm trying to keep my middle class job I have now. I am not going to be talking about talking about my weed past. So you know who you are, bro. I appreciate much love to you too, man. I appreciate you. But the so anyhow, Operation Green Speaker commenced later on there. It was already underway because of the snitch in Atlanta. And
Mhm.
our big supplier, bro, had been supplying multiple states. Okay. 100 pounds going to Indiana, another 100 to Georgia, guys in Tennessee. I mean, the dude had tentacles, right? And one of the individuals at that meetup who I had known for quite some time, had no problem flipping. When the DEA arrested him and the FBI arrested him, he folded like a cheap suit, and freaking him and there was other snitches in the case, and one of the a whole bunch of my friends from high school and college as well, one or two that went to college, were busted. And that literally was the end of the line for me, because if I had wanted to get back into the pot business, that was it.
Yeah.
My biggest people up north, I got one friend now who has a nice legal pot connoisseur place up in Oregon. He would have still been around, but basically everybody, bro. You know that movie, The Professional, where
Yeah.
he says everyone. The freaking, it was literally everyone. The DEA did multiple phases on this too. They would get one group, go through their phones, get a few rats, go to a new group.
Next.
They
Yeah.
had multiple stages, bro, and they just took out like 100 of the top guys in California. And I was the difference between being indicted and an unindicted co-conspirator was,
Mhm.
ironically enough, being pulled over, and that creates exculpatory evidence. They had access to my vehicle. Obviously, the DEA and the FBI would have searched it during when it was in the tow yard. You don't need a warrant if your car's been towed. They don't have to go get a warrant no more. In fact, they have to search your car to do inventory before they give you your stuff back to say that
Yeah.
they didn't steal your crap.
I ain't
And
caught a break.
so, ironically enough, my now ex-wife calling me up saying that she was pregnant with my daughter is what saved my ass. And again, I felt like crap that day. I was going through opiate withdrawals, and that's one reason why I stayed off of opiates, by the way. However, that's also why I ended up with that medicine that starts with the letter A, as
Mhm.
well as other ones, because when you're coming off of opiates, you can't sleep. So you start taking sleeping meds from the store, from the pharmacy, prescribed. You start taking clonidines, which is a medicine for blood pressure that helps with,
Right.
you start taking gabapentin and things like that. So just because you're off of heroin and whatever else, a lot of times you aren't done with your issues yet. You have
Yes, he's
other
going through other
medicines you're
things.
taking.
Yeah.
And so
And
that's
that's
how, it saved my ass, bro.
divine
Literally.
intervention there. And you mentioned the guy you were talking about said he didn't really want to relive his past. That's something that you kind of have to deal with when you do go to YouTube is, you know, you're laying it out there. It's out there. People are going to see it. You also do a show with a guy that's been a guest on my channel, Crime and Entertainment, um, Gene Borello. Tell us how that came about.
All right. So the way that I met Gene was during the lockdowns of 2020, which I thought were bullshit from day one. And because I do understand basic science that having a mask in your pocket all day collecting germs and then putting it on your face before you go to a store is actually going to make you more sick, not less. But apparently the rest of the world didn't figure this out. And so my friends and I had gotten into politics as a career, and I've worked for businesses as well. I, I worked for a U.S. senator when I was in college as an intern, and also a member of the U.S. House of Representatives as an intern in college. And then later on, I did campaign consulting. I have a public relations degree as one of the degrees I have. So I would get hired to help with campaigns. So I met a lot of politicians and Congressman Devin Nunes, for instance, who's now, he became Trump's friend in 2016 and now he does Truth Social. Devin Nunes, in fact, I lived in his congressional district till they redistricted. And Kevin McCarthy is another one that I had met. I used to deal with his people. I couldn't stand his friends, truth be told. There's a lot of ironic factionalism, very similar to the mob, but in politics, if you've been around the mob, you'll have no problem dealing with politicians and their factionalism. They just do it for real shit rather than the mob fighting over pennies compared to what politicians fight over. But the anyhow, with that, I protested those stupid lockdowns because I'm not, I don't listen. As a general rule, I don't listen to politicians when they're full of crap. And because I've known so many of them in my state, I know they are full of crap, especially the ones in California now, extremely far left. These guys are bozos. And so my friends and I decided to protest the mask laws out here by going into the stores without masks. And when the stores would call the cops on us, we would tell the cops, F you, we're in here shopping. We all have money. We're going to buy things now. You can either drag us out. It's the same cops that would have investigated me for drug running years ago. Like, oh shit, now he's doing political protesting.
Yeah.
But Borello saw me on Instagram and I made the national news, and Borello hit me up on IG and was like, hey, bro, what you guys did, there was a footage of me telling a cop to go F himself, basically. And of course, Gene Borello is going to be impressed by that.
Oh yeah.
The dude's telling the cops to go F off and, come on, I was like, take me to jail. I don't give a shit. You think I'm scared of jail? Well,
Yeah.
I'll just be reunited with some of my old bros from the street days. That's all. Send me
Yeah,
to prison. I don't care.
that probably made his day to see you
Oh
say that.
yeah, he hit me up. He's all, bro, we need to do this back here. They have the same bullshit laws. That's we met actually that way. And then I had already been doing some local media, but it was always related to addiction issues. I would talk
Right.
about how to overcome opiate and oxys and stuff. I didn't really get into the mob stuff because that just wasn't, but I showed him. He saw some of my videos from before, where I was interviewed on shows about that, and then we started talking, and then he was doing the show with Johnny as well by then, Johnny and Gene
Right.
show. So I started watching that. I'm like, oh shit, this is the dude that was around Gotti Jr. I remember John A. Light's name from before, like occasionally hearing about him, and on news and interviews he would do, or a YouTube video of his would pop up.
Yeah.
And so I talked to Gene. He's like, well, yeah, bro, I was involved with, the Detroit guys and yada, yada, yada. And we chatted and he asked me certain questions that only guys like us would know.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, wow, you are the real deal, ain't you? And I explained to him how it all worked here and all that. He asked around, of course, to make, verify
Yeah.
one or two things.
Yeah, of course.
And, so what happened was Gene encouraged me. And one of the dudes that was targeted in Operation Green Speaker, my friend, he Mike Mike Callie. It's a shortened version of his real name. he was one of the guys busted in Greenspeaker. He was actually chased down by the DEA Black Hawk helicopter. Yeah, I'll have to send him your way for an interview. You want to hear a crazy freaking drug bust? He was in the mountains of California in a major pot field, bro, growing dank. He was a phenomenal grower. He lives in Vegas now. But when he was arrested by the DEA, they sent that Black Hawk helicopter after him. So imagine, most dudes run from the cops from a cop car, right? You might
Yeah.
get the regular chopper, the ghetto bird. Imagine having Airwolf after your ass, you turn this way, and all of a sudden, freaking, you got a Black Hawk chopper following you like you're an Afghanistan guy running from them, except they're not shooting missiles at you. But but anyhow, he Gene saw his stuff too, and Gene was like, "Hey, you guys should do a podcast, bro." Freaking, by then he had done a bunch of shows, and so Gene helped us out to get us started on our first one, and then he introduced us to Hootie, because at the time Hootie had been interviewed by
Yep.
Gene, as well as in Johnny and Gene show, as well as some others.
Right.
And Hootie needed to have some partners, and Hootie had been in the weed game too in New York.
Yeah.
So he figured, hey, you guys will get along, which, well, yeah, Hootie's a cool dude. We get along.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Shout
Hootie
out
and
to Hootie.
I, chatted about the old weed stuff and how we used to move it and this and that. And so he's like, yeah, you're definitely the real deal. You know the methods, you know how it works, and you can explain it quickly. You don't have to go Google search it and all that.
Yeah.
And we started doing the show. We had to stop doing that particular show though, because um, Hootie's going through. He has like family stuff that he had to deal with, and then M. Callie had some stuff he had to deal with, and so I just stopped doing the show after I did it by myself for a little bit, and I did get great hit counts and all that, but I was like, I'll wait until I can come back, and also Gene had been arrested by then,
Right.
so he was sitting in the federal, and before he was arrested. Uh, he was doing the Johnny and Gene show, and then all of a sudden it was left with John and just Felix, right?
All right.
And then when he got out the first time, he was on probation, but he's like, bro, once I'm off probation, we got to do something. And so I waited until he was off probation. So here we are now, and we're just getting back up. And I've been rusty with running a show and being a host,
Yeah. It's
but
a lot of work.
a little bit of practice, I'll be right back to how good I was a few years ago, and with better equipment and all that good stuff. And we'll be rocking and rolling. We're already getting great hit counts considering, and
Right.
all that good stuff. So Gene and I will definitely be around for a while.
Well, shout out to Gene, man. I loved his interview. It done real well on my show. I like Gene. I think he's a very cool dude. We text from time to time. Anytime there's like a podcast that I'm curious about, I'll usually hit him up and bend his ear on it because he's been on, pretty much all the big ones. So shout out to him. How often do you guys do the show? Once a week or?
We're going to be doing a drop in shows a couple times a week. We're
Okay.
waiting for Soft White Underbelly to come out. I did two pre-record sessions with them.
Yep.
Obviously, one where you and I met up in SoCal,
Right.
and once that's out, Mark, in fact, the guy who runs Soft White, he and I, he texts me back and forth. Now he was like, "Bro, you did the second best job after Mike Dowd on my show. Like, out of all these guys, Mike Dowd was the all-time best interview. You are a close second."
Yeah.
So Mark, and the thing with me too is he loved that I brought all kinds of paperwork proving my juvenile stuff, and
Right.
the whole being locked up thing and all that. And I also had a probation reports where they said that I was connected to the mob and some cartel stuff. They considered me a flight risk, and if I had to go to jail or prison, that I was a level 3,
Mm.
even though I didn't have a long record. They put me as a level 3, which is a
Fair
higher
enough.
medium because of flight risk and stuff. So I showed them, signed by the professionals, legit, regular, the real paperwork from the courts, where it's stuff you can't forge. Basically, I brought my college transcripts to prove that I wasn't some BSer claiming to have college degrees I didn't have or any of that. So he was impressed, and we did a good thing. And so once that comes out, And I've got some other interviews lined up that I can't mention right now, but once that drops, I'm going to do some others. And then that's when we're going to really be doing a couple a week or so and just dropping videos. Ultimately, we'll, start doing paid sessions and private stuff and members and
Right.
membership and whatever else and that kind of thing.
Well, tell everybody what your channel on YouTube is, your Instagram, where they can go to find you and track you down.
All right. So it's Mob True Crime. And I have a website, mobtruecrime.com, as you can see on the screen. My IG, same name. There's also a Facebook group, Mob True Crime. Um, I also have there's I'm setting up a Rumble because there's certain things you can't say on YouTube, and I'm
Right.
getting sick and tired of censoring my language. You know, it's like, have you ever watched the censored version of Casino or Goodfellas on local
Yeah.
TV?
Yeah.
Freak you, Sam Rothstein. Freak you. Sharon Stone is saying F freak you. I was like, dude, no, that takes away. You got to be able to say some cuss words and stuff.
Yeah.
So, the and I also have, I have to be careful. One reason why I do not say any of the names of people. Now, for those of you in Michigan who knew me or met me, same thing with California. Quite a few have reached out. If you grant me permission, I will say your stuff. But one reason is I've never snitched. I have never cut any plea deals like that. And I've always kept my mouth shut. And so I also, certain things I can't talk about and would not talk about, nor will I ever say names. And it's the right thing to do anyways. You don't go putting people on blast like my bro I mentioned earlier. You know, he said he might interview, but if he does, he wants to do it under an assumed name and change his voice, which I understand. He has a career and all that, and he also went to, he was a stand-up guy. He went to federal prison, did his time, came home. So I've never snitched. The one dude that did rat me out, he got taken care of back in 2003 on the streets of California. His Asian friends didn't think it was so smart to rat out white boys. They felt that was still snitching. And so his Asian friends made sure to make sure that he got to meet his maker. And I'll just say this, I have long since forgiven him. I do not care. People snitch, whatever. And quite frankly, there's certain crimes where guys should be snitched on for. If you touch kids, whatever, you
Yeah.
do certain things, you innocent people take out and somebody gets you off the streets, too damn bad.
Yeah.
The lowest form of life is not a snitch who takes violent criminals off the street. The lowest forms of life are the people that will defend, that do harm to kids and innocent people. And then the close second are those who go on YouTube and other social media and defend those people and claim that no one should have ever ratted them out. It's
Yeah.
part of the game. My bro, Freeway Rick Ross, was on Vlad TV. He was asked about that. I talked to Freeway 2 days ago, and I have the same attitude that if you're involved with crime, you have to accept the fact that you could possibly get ratted on.
Yeah.
Now, you don't do it, but if it happens to you, it's not their fault. It's your fault.
Yeah. It's part of the game.
It is
Well,
absolutely part of the game, and it right or wrong, it's what it is, you
uh,
know?
well, Jeff, I appreciate you coming on the show, my brother. I've had a blast. We'll definitely have to have you back later on down the road for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll have to have you on, Gene and I, and we'll have to get into your story of, how you got into Hulkamania, all that good stuff. So, and
Yeah, for
again, I
sure.
like that picture behind you, the infamous, if you know,
Yeah.
when that music starts playing and he's got a cigarette in his mouth, somebody's going to get whacked in the movie.
Yeah. It's like one of the most powerful scenes ever with no words spoken.
Yeah, yeah. There's always like a theme song to the part
Yeah.
where they get whacked in the movie Casino. It's there is a house in New Orleans. They called, if for the guys that get clipped in California, if they ever do a mob movie on California, the part where they get clipped, they're gonna play Jefferson Airplane's White Rabbit one pill makes you bigger, and one pill makes you small. You gotta throw a little hippie kind of action with ours. And
I
real
think
quick,
they put
shout
that
out
in.
to Joe Donato, by the way. Joe Donato was the highest ranking mobster I ever met. However, I met him after he left. He became a legit Christian minister. Look him up. He passed away in 2018. He was the guy who, and we'll talk about maybe this next time if I come on there again,
Yeah,
when
sure.
I come on there again. But Joe Donato, he was a Mike Franzese before a Mike Franzese. He never snitched or anything, but he left the mob in the 70s, became a preacher, minister.
I heard his testimony. Wasn't he a Gambino guy?
He was from a family back east that he would not name ever. He was actually, if I had to guess from what he had hinted to me, he was tied to Buffalino, or it was one of the, it was Pennsylvania. He was from Reading,
Okay.
Pennsylvania, or Reading, Pennsylvania, however you guys pronounce it exactly. And
I heard one years ago that was actually still on a cassette tape, so that lets you know how far that
yeah,
was
well,
back
look
in the
up Joe Donato. You'll see the dude was at one point like the second, third most powerful mafioso in my whole state. And this is during a time when the mob had real pull out here.
wow.
And the dude beat a couple homicide cases. He whacked out his bookie friends. He did a lot more whacking than just two. So that's one reason why I don't have a problem with Gene others when they get into some issues, because I understand it takes time to get away from that world.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of trauma, PTSD of sorts. I reserve PTSD for soldiers and cops and firefighters, but there's sort of a PTSD from that life. And it takes a while to really get back to being just a
Yeah, to
regular Joe
acclimate.
citizen.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
Joe Donato was by far the best influence I could have, because I could sit with him after I was away from things and he could tell me, how to live a better life, and how to move on, and the mental struggles he went through as he was changing his life. So shout out, God bless you, Joe. uh, you were by far the most influential mobster that I got to sit with and know that I can actually say his name on camera. So thank you.
Well, shout out to him. Shout out to JC for coming by the show. Be sure to go check out his YouTube, ladies and gentlemen. We'll have it in the show notes on the show. We'll also put a link to his Instagram on there and his website as well. Want to thank everybody for checking out this episode. JC, thank you for stopping by Crime and Entertainment, my friend. I've had a blast.
Thanks, bro. Have a good one. We'll see you next time.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Hollywood Wade. That was JC Crow. We'll see you next time on Crime and Entertainment.